Nompumelelo Siziba is watching events as we count down to the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's maiden budget speech. Nompu, what's the latest?
Thanks very much, Desiree. Well, you join us here in Cape Town on this very interesting day, of course, where we're expecting the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana to deliver his maiden budget speech 2022. Just before you crossed to us, we felt a huge reverberation around us, something going on the outside of Parliament. We know that EFF are due to protest a little bit later. I don't know if it was them, but we felt a huge reverberation. So that was quite interesting. We'll see later on as to what that was exactly. But of course, will the budget speech of 2020 reverberate in the South African context, especially given the fact that there are so many challenges? We've had challenges in the South African economy for years, balancing the need to ensure that we cater for those who are less well off in society and also ensuring that the economy can grow so that we can create jobs and so on and so forth. The great news, of course, is that the fiscus has managed to get more money into the kitty than was anticipated. Last February, a certain quantum was expected, but now it looks as though economists' estimates are that it could be anything between 150 and 200 billion rand more than what was anticipated in February last year, which means that the government now has some wiggle room in terms of where it's going to spend and so on and so forth. Will they bring down the heavy debt load that the country has, or will they spend more money on social issues, or will they spend more money on infrastructure? It remains to be seen. That will be in the detail of the budget later this afternoon. But just to unpack things a little bit for us, I do have with me Kim Silberman. She's an economist at RMB, just to give us her thoughts before she goes into the lockup to read many documents that will be giving her a sense of what's happening in terms of the budget. Thank you very much, Kim, for joining us.
It's a pleasure. And firstly, I'd like to say happy birthday.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, super. So, of course, government is expecting much more revenue, or has collected a lot more revenue by the end of February 2022. Yeah. It should be in excess of 150 billion or more than was expected last year. So, where do you think the government is going to allocate that money to, given all our challenges?
They've already allocated that money. That money's gone to pay down debt and also to relieve the average person in the street with respect to the devastation caused by COVID. But we have used that money to reduce debt. So we've paid down around 65 billion of debt, and we've also reduced issuance by about 60 billion. So I think Treasury's done a really good job at balancing the allocation of that revenue windfall, which, I think as we were discussing it, that revenue windfall is not going to be around for forever and may actually subside this year.
Yes, well, that was what I was going to ask you, is that if this is sort of like, a once in a blue moon event, and given the fact that we do anticipate that economic growth is going to grow below 2% this year and the following year as well, basically on average, economic growth over the medium term, over the next 3 years, economic growth is going to be sub 2%. Given that, do you think that this is sort of a one-hit wonder and that government would need to be careful where it applies its finances to, because some projects or programs may not necessarily be sustainable?
Definitely. I mean, there's a few things I could comment on with respect to that. The one is, last time we had a commodity boom, we did use that money to increase public sector wages on a sustained basis at above inflation, and that left us with quite a massive wage bill to continue to fulfill even when commodity prices fell away. And that's really led us to a lot of the kind of debt problems we have now. And I think the same, we don't want to get into the same problem where a short-term revenue gain results in a long-term fixed cost, because that's not sustainable. So I think that's something that we do need to be careful of. I think also when you mentioned the amount of growth that we can expect, I think there's a big risk we could see growth at around 1%. And that's really because we're hiking interest rates into a slowing growth environment. Jobs have barely recovered. I just wonder, we're keeping up with the rest of the world, but what does that mean for growth? And I think we need to really monitor that carefully, and I expect that to become more part of the MPC conversation towards the end of the year as inflation starts to slow, because it is going to be very tough to maintain growth even above 1%. If we're hiking rates to the extent that the monetary policy's model shows we should.
Yeah, and then of course the big issue that you economists always talk about are structural reforms.
Yes.
We need catalysts to actually spur economic growth. There've been conversations in the telecommunications area, the spectrum, obviously the energy sector, and we have heard announcements around investments, or at least requests for proposals for people to make investments in the energy sector. How hopeful are you that we're going to see some movement in the area of structural reform?
I'm actually quite hopeful on the energy sector. I think one of the it's a pity that our transport sector isn't going to be able to take advantage of this commodity boom. So you've seen that even with rising prices of commodities, our volume of exports has not increased. It's just the value of exports, and it's because of rail systems that we can't take advantage of this commodity price bonanza. And I think that is a pity, and we need to work on that. But when it comes to the electricity sector, there's a real chance that could turn around, especially with the Climate Finance Committee, which will, I think, put together a plan that needs to be presented at COP27 at the end of this year, which will really highlight how we can use that $8.5 billion that hopefully we will receive, and that can be injected into transforming the energy sector. And I think with that kind of capital boost, we can really start to make a bit of a difference. And also, all of the policymakers and the stakeholders are on the same page for once when it comes to energy, and that hasn't been the case for such a long time. So I am quite hopeful that sort of 25, 26, if we can actually reduce load shedding by then, we can start to grow at 2.5-3%. And I think that's quite exciting.
Yeah, let's hope we get there.
Yeah.
One last thing before I let you go, Kim.
Sure.
Of course, we know the unemployment situation is terrible. We have an official unemployment rate of just under 35%. It's much higher when you include other people. But now, just in terms of the initiatives that the government has put forward, the presidential employment stimulus and all of that, do you think this is warranted in the short term? Because obviously you need economic growth to get the jobs created, and that takes time.
Yes, I think it is warranted in the short term, considering that COVID is just such an extreme event that if you do have money from a commodity price surprise, you have to spend some of that on relieving people's stress and their economic situation. But you need a balance. So you need to, and I think Treasury's done that. They've balanced it with cash going towards the social wage and also going towards paying down debt. And I think they've managed to strike a really good balance there. But our debt is still not sustainable. And the only thing that can make it sustainable is growth, which is why you need to unlock things like energy and transport. Otherwise, our debt is growing faster than we can pay it down.
Yeah.
Treasury's doing all it can, but it is growing faster than we can pay it down. So I think ultimately, as is the case with South Africa for the last 2 decades, or as long as I've been looking at economics, it's been about growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Kim, for your time.
Okay.
Kim Silberman, she's an economist at RMB, and of course she talks about debt there. The reason why we worry about debt is that if our debt becomes too big, it currently stands at around 77, the debt to GDP ratio is 77.8%, somewhere there. We could get a revised number from the finance minister, but if that balloons out of control, the wicked ratings agencies are watching, and of course they would further downgrade us into further junk status, and it means that the cost of borrowing would go up that much higher, which makes it more expensive to do business, to invest in things and create jobs, etc., etc. So that's a metric that of course will be closely watched by the markets and the ratings agencies. Of course, we're going to be giving you rolling coverage today before and after the budget speech, so do stay tuned. It's back to you, Desiree.